Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hey everyone, it's Jory Rose. Welcome back to the podcast this week, where I'm bringing you a conversation with Helen Maffini, who I spoke with during our Surviving to Thriving Summit, as she talks about self-care for parents and how we can bring mindfulness into the lives of kids. This is so timely, as I have just launched my parenting membership that you can join if you are feeling all the COVID-related stressors as we begin the new school year. Because here's what I know for certain. Emotions are contagious, and if parents are stressed and overwhelmed, the kids are going to pick up on that, making it really difficult to manage school, especially if everyone is working from home and kids are doing school remote. So if you're interested in learning more about the parenting membership, check it out because the doors are closing September 15th. The links are in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Helen, and I know it is a really timely topic for so many of us. Stay healthy and be well. Hi, and welcome back to the Surviving to Thriving Summit, where you can learn to grow through adversity. I am so grateful for Helen Maffini for joining us all the way from Portugal today. Helen, thank you so much for being part of the summit.
Thanks for inviting me, Jory. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Helen, you and I, our paths crossed, I don't know, was it 4 or 5 years ago? Something like that, or maybe less, a little bit less than that. But you do amazing summits yourself. And I was really grateful to have been a part of the work that you do. So please tell our listeners and viewers what it is that you do.
Sure. So I'm the director at MindBe Education, and we help students, parents, and teachers to bring mindfulness into their classrooms and homes. And we do that through our curriculums and also through the summits that Jory just mentioned. So we run an annual preschool mindfulness summit where we bring in different experts to share the latest research and strategies. And we also have a global mindfulness summit that I co-host with Chris Willard. And we do other online things, like we have a storybook program coming up where authors are reading their mindful stories and then giving us tips about how we can engage children more by doing certain things while we're reading the stories.
Oh, that's so beautiful, Helen. I absolutely love it. And I know when I used to teach mindfulness in the schools, that some of the classes that I did go into was a preschool age. And when I would tell this to people, they would be like, what? Like, you're doing mindfulness with 3-year-olds? They can't do that. And it was amazing. These kids not only loved it and looked forward to it, but they got it.
Yeah.
So speak a little bit more and, tell people when you talk about mindfulness with preschoolers, what does that even look like? Because I imagine everyone's like all wiggly and, that's what the image is, that they can't focus, they can't calm down, they can't pay attention. It's a really wrong assumption.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think I agree. Like, it is amazing what the children can do and what they love to do. And the schools I've worked with, I've seen children just really flourish and love participating in these exercises. But I think we have to go into preschools with expectations that, these kids are not going to sit for 30 minutes and be still or things like that. So I always encourage all the teachers and anybody working with young children to just keep it really playful, to go with the flow with what kids are enjoying, and use lots of movement and sound and sensory experiences to draw out those moments of mindfulness in the classroom. And when we're teaching discrete lessons in mindfulness, then keep it short and bring in real objects and let children touch things and let children explore mindfulness in a fun fun way. So, for example, when we think about teaching children to notice our breath, we have so many different breaths that we can play with them and teach them, like, the hot chocolate breath, I'm sure many people have know, or the soup breath, sometimes it's called, where we breathe in the smell of the soup or the hot chocolate and then blow out to cool it off. And using
it's just so simple.
Yeah, so simple, right? I mean, there's some great storybooks, so children love to and can really connect with stories and the characters in stories when they're linked to mindfulness. So I always encourage teachers to use books, and then mindful movement, and kids will want to squiggle around and move, and that's fine. You can bring that in as part of the practice. And what are you noticing about your body right now?
Right.
You have the squirms or the swiggles, and just be mindful, I think, as teachers, that of what the message is that we're trying to share with children, and making sure that it's appropriate for their age and attention span. But they love it. Yeah,
they do love it. They do love it. I know, especially with teaching kids to breathe, because if you don't guide them in actually how to do it, they're going to sound like Darth Vader. And right, like that's not going to be the most calming and relaxing breath to their brain or their body. So it's really helpful, like you're describing, to give these very specific visuals to help them connect to their breath. One of my favorite ones I used to do with kids was I would go into a classroom and I would bring Beanie Babies.
Okay.
And I would have them lie down and put the Beanie Baby on their tummies. And say, okay, just watch and see what happens. And then they'd always say, oh, it's going up and down. Oh, that's so cool. Why is it going up and down? Oh, I'm breathing. Yeah. And so the whole focus was just watching the stuffed animal rise and fall on their belly. And it was this indirect way of connecting to the breath. Because sometimes, as we know with kids, that breath is hard to access. So we got to give them multiple ways to get there when they need to be able to calm down or catch their breath if they're upset or angry or having a little temper tantrum.
For sure. And I think that, using the physical objects is so beneficial for young children. So like you said, the beanie bags, or Hoberman sphere, which is a kind of ball that goes in and out and kind of mimics the kids love that. They love it. If you can get, one for everyone in the class, or if you have a child at home and they can run their own breath together with this ball in the same rhythm, blowing bubbles is another one.
Yeah, bubble breaths are always so fun. And I think these are really great reminders that we're giving parents right now to be able to do at home, because I know so many parents are overwhelmed with now all of a sudden having to be a full-time parent and a teacher, and if you still have a job, and these are job titles they didn't sign up for. Like, there's a reason we send our kids to school, is to have the experts do this.
Exactly.
Right? Or at least to give parents a break for a couple of hours a day. And so I think it's really helpful for parents to be kind to themselves and recognizing they're thrust into something, at least right now during this pandemic, that, no one knows how to do. And I think all these tips are great for parents to remember to do.
Yes, so true. I think it's, it's a really challenging time for a lot of people. A few people are finding it easier, but I think most people are finding it quite challenging. And if you have, young children or primary school age children that really need a lot of support when they're at home, and you're trying to work and manage the house, and might have fear or expectations about what's going on in the outside world and how it's going to affect our futures, it can be really overwhelming. So
it can be really overwhelming.
Self-care at this point in time is something that's really, really important for all of us.
It's so important. One of my favorite things that I used to do with the kids, and I know there's different names for them. I always called it a Moody Jar. But there's a couple of different names that we could use for it. But basically, for those parents out there watching right now, it's so easy to do. Get a little mason jar, fill it with water and glycerin. The glycerin will thicken the water, and have your child put scoops of glitter into the water. Now, I found extra fine glitter works the best because regular art glitter is too heavy. But I would have the kids assign an emotion that they often experience as they put different color scoops of the glitter in. Now, when I practiced this with my daughters, I was amazed because my daughter put positive emotion in as well as the challenging emotions. So I thought that was a really beautiful addition to a Moody Jar because we can feel both positive and negative if we're labeling them at the same time. And then I always would use Gorilla Glue to seal the tops because I would always tell the students, you don't want your emotions all over the floor. But the idea is you're basically making a snow globe. And
I was going to say snow globe.
Yeah, it's like a snow globe, right? And so when you shake it up and the glitter swirling around, it's an amazing visual for kids to hold in their hand and see, this is what it feels like inside of me with all my emotions swirling. And they're not going to go away because they're part of us, but they will settle.
Yeah.
And it's just so powerful. I would have kids, one year at the school I was at, we made just 2 for the classroom, and kids would take turns putting it on their desk. The next year, we made one for every single kid in the whole school.
Wow. Yeah.
And they loved it. I had one little boy come up to me one morning, Miss Jory, I really need a Moody Jar at my dad's house. But he had the language to be able to say, I need something to help calm me down. I need this tool. And that's half the battle, I think, is giving kids the language to put to their experience.
Exactly. I think I get so emotional when I see kids that, are really embracing these practices, and, we call it the calming jar activity, but you have parents that come in and say that, their child came home and said, Mommy, I think you need to use the calming jar because you seem to be very stressed right now. And they do develop that language. And I just finished my doctorate research.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I brought in my preschool mindfulness curriculum into 7 schools in Hong Kong, and that was one of the findings, was that children, through either verbally or through drawing pictures and scribing words if they're a little bit older, were able to express, what mindfulness is and different parts of emotional literacy, and what does sharing look like, what does being kind look like, through all these processes. So it was really interesting to see some of the kind of vocabulary that they did develop and attach to during the curriculum implementation.
It's so beautiful. I mean, to think that, kids as young as 3 years old can be gaining these tools, incorporating it into their language, into their practices, into their childhood. I mean, I know for certain I would have been a much different kid.
Yeah.
And probably early adult before I found mindfulness in my mid-30s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of just being able to recognize without judgment or fear what was going on inside of me.
Yeah, I'm so passionate about this because I really believe it can change the world. If young children learn these skills when their neural pathways are being built and it's embedded into their learning in their brains, and they, especially developing empathy and compassion for themselves and for others, that, they're going to take that with them throughout life, and life will be very different, I think, if we can teach children these skills. So
100%.
Let's get it into as many places as we can.
It's so amazing. And I remember one time I had a parent come to me and say, my kid needs more compassion. because he was third grade. He was very competitive on the sports field, and the competitive nature in him led him to not really care about how it affected other people. And he was losing some friends. And it was such an interesting conversation with the parents because they were wanting him to have compassion. And at the root of it, long story short, he didn't know his own emotional experience.
Right.
So how could he have compassion for someone else until he actually understood what his own emotions were? And it was like this big light bulb moment for these parents because they were wanting me to just, quote, fix him.
Right.
Of like, can't you just teach him compassion? Like, just tell him to be more aware and kind of others and how they feel. And when I said to the parents, like, well, how does he respond when you ask him how he's feeling? I don't know. Like that's such a typical kid response. And sometimes they don't need to know, but they can maybe describe what it feels like or where it hurts in their body or, the tension they might feel. This kid had zero emotional literacy. So how could he have compassion for somebody else?
Yeah. And that's another way that I think storybooks are so powerful with young children, because sometimes it's also difficult for young children to speak about their own experience, or they might not really understand it. But if they can relate to somebody, a character in a storybook, or even a puppet or a doll that's, kind of mirroring what their experiences, I think those are really powerful ways to get children talking and building up that language and understanding, and then finding ways that they can change their emotion if they're stuck in a place that's not going very well at the moment. So so important, I think, teaching all of these things to
it is
ones.
and I'm so pleased that over the years that mindfulness has really not only held true to such the integrity and foundation in Buddhist meditation practice, but has, I think, very skillfully transferred to secular application and secular language.
Yeah.
Because when I was first starting in schools, it wasn't the case at the time. And I struggled finding storybooks to read that were not very Buddhist in nature. And I was at a private school, but I couldn't have gone into a public school and read any of those. And even in a private school, I was very mindful of my language in which I would talk about these things. Yeah. Because this is, it's a challenge. And so that's when I wrote my book, Squirmy Learns to Be Mindful, because I was like, okay, I'm not seeing what the resources I'm needing right now. Like one of my favorite books, Moody Jar Meditates, but it was pretty, had some pretty strong Buddhist tones. And even that was a little bit of a stretch. And, it came out with the second edition a couple of years ago, but it's not a perfect book, but it was good enough for what I was wanting to offer. A simple story of, the caterpillar waiting to become a butterfly who's really anxious and impatient.
Right. Yeah. And nowadays there's so many. I mean, even just in 2020, there's so many books being released that are, and they might not be called mindfulness, but there's elements in the stories that
anything that's going to offer social emotional learning.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's just so many great books. I keep adding them to my list for when I go out to schools and say, hey, these books are really good. You should add them to your orders and your classroom libraries and things. So, really powerful.
That's amazing. And I love that you just, did these studies. What are some other ways that you can maybe give parents some tools for how to teach some of this stuff to kids at home? So we've got the bubble breath, the different breathing techniques.
Sure.
But what are some other tools that, especially as parents are stressed out and anxious themselves, it's hard to always role model what it is that they're wanting their kids to do. So what advice would you have to parents right now?
Sure. Well, the main thing I would say is it's really great to share kind of these practices with kids and things, but I think the thing that we need to do first is practice ourselves and young children especially are very good at picking up on how you're really being.
Oh,
And,
yes, they are.
much more than what you're saying. So, that energy comes through if you're feeling extremely stressed or angry or annoyed, frustrated, overwhelmed, which many people are right now. And, that's normal, like it's part of the experience, I
Right.
think, that some people have to go through. So I think it's, really taking the time for your own self-care would be my first tip for parents or teachers at home. And that means, maybe putting some boundaries on different areas of your life. It might be on time. It might be, who you say yes to and who you say no to. A lot of people are, very helpful and like to help others, but that can get overwhelming if you're saying yes to everyone and
Yeah, for
feeling
sure.
like, oh, and now I have to help this person and do this. And we naturally, most people want to be helpful. So, I think setting those kind of personal boundaries around a lot of things, time, also even about how much we're absorbing that's in the news.
I've been telling people
And
they need social distancing from the news.
yeah, I mean, really, I think this is a huge one. Many people are getting addicted to their phones and technology, waking up in the middle of the night to check coronavirus numbers. And
Right.
it's, I think, if you just can put some boundaries around that, maybe check 10 minutes in the afternoon. Don't do it first thing in the morning. Just try to get through your day and then limit the time that you spend looking at that kind of information, because it can be overwhelming and fearful.
Yeah, it floods us.
And all these thoughts can go through our minds. So, and then just bringing your own kind of mindful moments into the day. So a lot of people who maybe are, aren't familiar with meditation or even mindfulness, they might not know there's really simple things that you can do. You don't have to start meditating for 30 minutes or an hour.
Right.
You can, there's lots of great apps to start kind of being mindful or meditating that have, 3 or 5 minute little meditations on them that you can use. But I like to do things like just kind of make habits out of different things that help me through the day. So whenever I open a door, I stop and take a breath and kind of ground myself and come back to the present moment. I'm a very future-oriented person, so I have to remind myself to do these things. I even set alarms sometimes to remind myself. Otherwise, I can get very caught up in work and rushing around. So setting kind of alarms to say like, oh, Helen, it's time to go and have a walk or a cup of tea.
It's time to just breathe right now. Yeah, even if it's just that. And, for so many people who are busy and stressed and overwhelmed, it feels impossible to take a break in their day, that it's going to ruin their flow.
Yeah.
And yet, in fact, that break is going to be the very thing to make your flow more efficient and effective. It's counterintuitive.
Yeah, and I think it's, with kids at home, working, I mean, even things like eating can get put, like, oh, I don't have time to, or just eating something unhealthy at your desk because you're trying to do so many things. But if you can just carve out small, 5 minutes to kind of just be present, have a cup of tea or whatever it is you like, breathe. I think it really does make a huge difference in your productivity later on in the day, actually, and how you're feeling, because
it's huge.
It doesn't take long, and I think these little short things that we can do throughout the day really help us to just pause and come back, and also the thoughts. You can say, okay, those are just thoughts. I don't want to listen to them right now.
Easier said
Right,
than
they're
done.
taking me down a path that's probably not the best for me. So, just creating that awareness, I think, and putting in tiny 1 minute, 5 minute little rituals into your day that can really be beneficial. That would be one big thing I would say to do.
Yeah, it's huge. It's one little thing that's a one huge thing, right? It doesn't take a lot of time out of your day, but the implications and the effects and the ripple effect to it is just amazing. And, it's interesting. I often would get, as a therapist, a lot of parents calling me and say, hey, my kid's got anxiety, my kid's got ADHD, my kid's depressed, my kid's really stressed, all the challenges that we face, and would say, can you work with my kid? And I would often say, yes, I can. And can I start working with you first? Because when I would often find, the parents, it becomes so much of a do as I say, not as I do environment. And the kids are going to pick up on that really fast. So if you aren't role modeling what you're saying and expecting and wanting of them, you're not going to get much buy-in on any of it.
Yeah, it's so, I think it's, the most important thing, especially I've seen it quite a bit in schools where you can just see a teacher is overwhelmed, stressed, and they're, dinging a bell. That's not time for mindfulness.
Right. Like, it's not just so ironic, right? Like screaming, it's time for mindfulness.
Yeah. So it's like, it really, kids pick up on the smallest things, and all those mirror neurons as well are working to help them as well. They're trying to figure out what's going on, and they will follow what you do more than what you say, for sure. So
they will. And I also think, parents have the ability to shift the entire culture in the home.
Yeah.
Because one of the things, Helen, it was so interesting when I was in the schools for 4 years, and I was with these kids, and I grew with them for so long. And I would notice that if the parents didn't have access to these tools, and here you're teaching these young kids these tools, one of the things that I found so fascinating is it almost had this, and there's no scientific backing for this, it's just my observational, analysis, but the kids would almost get this strange increase in anxiety or frustration because it was now like they knew what, quote, should be happening as far as an emotional management response. And when it wasn't happening, it was agitating. Because they know, what they're doing and what they're learning. And it's hard when they're not seeing it played out outside of themselves. And so that's where I made this big shift to working with parents. Because I'm like, okay, we all need this, but some of the feedback I would get from students was so fascinating. The frustration of their parents just losing it and not being able to hear the kids say, like you said earlier, Mom, you look really stressed out. You need to take a minute and just breathe.
Yeah. And I think it's so powerful for a parent or a teacher to, we all go through these, where nobody becomes all perfect because they practice mindfulness, right? Or learn these things. We still all have our moments, but if you can, in a classroom or at home, if you can say to your child, like, oh, I'm starting to feel a little bit stressed out. I think I'm going to take some deep breaths. Like, do you want to help me? Shall we take them together? And kind of model that way that, I don't feel great all the time. And this is how I resolve the situation when I'm feeling anxious or upset, or just modeling, I'm going to write in my journal now and put some of the feelings that I'm feeling there. And do you want to join me and help me do it? Or maybe you can do that when you are feeling unsettled as well. So just really modeling what you're telling the children to do, I think is an important part of the process.
It's huge. I remember this one day, my kids were younger, and I was trying to get them into the bath. And, that's always a hard time of the night.
Yeah.
And I was really getting frustrated. They just weren't doing it. And my inclination was to raise my voice and just get frustrated and angry about it. But I recognized that wasn't going to solve any of the problems. Definitely wasn't going to make me feel better. Was not going to make them feel better. And it definitely wasn't going to get them in the bath any faster, which was the goal, right?
Yeah.
And so I did exactly what you just said. I just paused and I was like, wow, you guys, you know what? I'm noticing, I'm beginning to get really frustrated right now. My blood is starting to boil, my heart's starting to race. So I'm afraid if I don't take a second, I'm just going to raise my voice and I'm not going to feel good about it. You're not going to feel good about it. So I'm just going to take a second. And I literally just stopped in front of them and and I took a few breaths. And I was like, okay, how can we get into the bath? And my parenting, since I started this practice 8, 9, 10 years ago, there's no need to raise our voices anymore. Mm. I've got 2 teenage daughters that there's never yelling in the house. And I'm not just glorifying it. There's never yelling in the house because there's no need to. That's not to say we don't experience our emotions. We're just not reacting to them in a way that's taking away compassion or empathy, or most importantly, the connection of how that can bring us together in those challenging moments.
Yeah. And I think it's so powerful for children to see adults doing that because, sometimes children think adults know everything and, they would never experience these kind of things. So just to see them explaining it, or if they are other, very reactive type of parent or teacher, kind of showing them that they notice this and they are going to put some measures in to try and calm the situation. And it sometimes parents do yell and teachers yell and just saying sorry and explaining, wow, my blood got, my heart was racing and my blood, and I'm really sorry, I shouldn't have done that. And next time I'm going to try and take a breath or pause or leave the room or whatever it is to manage that better.
I think that's a really important point you bring up around, having our kids see the parents be honest with the emotions that they're feeling. Because I know I've talked to, a lot of parents. I mean, most of my clients are women. And there's this big assumption and belief that we should role model to our kids that we've got it put together all the time. And it's how is that helping the child? The other day I had a bad afternoon and I was sitting on my meditation cushion in my office and I was crying. And my 16-year-old walked in. And she's like, Mom, what's wrong? And I'm like, I'm just really sad. And I was crying. And she goes, come here. And she put her arms around me and let me put my head on her shoulder. And she held me as I cried and was like, yeah, it's totally understandable why you're crying. And that's a very vulnerable place for many parents to be. But my 16-year-old really comforted me. That felt really nice. But it was also role modeling to her, you know what? When you're sad, crying is an appropriate response.
And role modeling to accept help,
yes,
we can't manage everything ourselves. Sometimes we need a hug, and no matter what age we are, we need we just need someone to talk to us, to put their arm around us and kind of soothe us a bit. So,
but for so many parents, the thought of that sounds horrifying.
Yeah,
because it's really vulnerable.
Yeah, for sure. But I think, the way to really change things in society is to make these kind of practices a lot more normal or a lot more everyday, and let people see that, there is a way to create that pause and to not react immediately. And we learn that by making the mistake of doing it and noticing it and
right.
not doing it the next time. But talking with kids of all ages about what's happening and why that happened and what we're going to do to, keep practicing.
Yeah.
I think is the way to let them know that it's a practice, and sometimes we don't do it perfectly, and other times we do, and we have to keep practicing until it becomes a real habit in our bodies, and it's just a natural part of who we are, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I think especially when things are hard, and when times are stressful, and this idea of, growing through adversity, on the one hand, someone might say, I don't have the bandwidth to practice mindfulness right now because I'm so stressed, I'm so anxious, I'm so overwhelmed. I can't add anything new to my to-do list. And I always remind people like, hey, this isn't something you add to your to-do list. This is your to-be list. Who do you want to be in the world? How do you want to show up? What's the quality of presence you want to bring? And in fact, the challenging time is the most perfect opportunity to practice this. It's not about when life is easy and flowing, then we don't need as much emotional management and emotional regulation. So for right now, like this is where we can turn to.
Managing the waves, isn't it? Surfing the waves. Yeah, and it's not always going to be nice flat water. We're going to have to go
and we can't expect it to be.
And I think it's beautiful in the end, because if we didn't have all these experiences and emotions, we won't be able to appreciate some of the nicer moments and emotions that are going on in as much capacity as if it was just like that all the time. It would just be I don't know what it would be like, fluffy and boring. I think.
Yeah, it would. We would have no baseline of comparison, right? To really know joy, we have to know suffering.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, Helen, thank you so much for sharing these tips for parents on the importance of their self-care and for explaining some ways to bring mindfulness into kids. I think these are always timeless tools and reminders. And I think especially right now that we can utilize this as a resource to not just survive these moments that we're all in, but to truly, like, you're building a foundation, a reservoir of resources within inside of ourselves and our kids. And it's so valuable. And so thank you for the work that you are so dedicated in doing. If, we need to get all your curriculum all over the world so all preschoolers can, get that foundation. It would just be the most beautiful, beautiful thing. So thank you again.
Thanks so much, Joria. It was really nice speaking with you.
Always is. Be well.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat. Visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.